Okay. So I'm going to talk today about your PASSCAL Instrument Center, how to get started planning your first or next experiment. This talk originated from a desire on the part of the PASSCAL Standing Committee to answer questions we were hearing coming from the early investigator community about how to work with the PIC and how the PIC works. Also as a component of trying to increase communication with our fellow seismology community. In addition, the PIC staff has been working on clarifying roles of principal investigators and PIC staff in an experiment. In addition, as you all are probably aware, government budgets have been changing over recent years, and so now is a good time to make sure we check in with the community and clarify what the PIC can do for you as seismologists. This presentation is therefore closely related to a pre-AGU workshop that PIC staff and a couple of PIC users put together for 2014, and is really a more condensed version of that where I'm the PIC user that's going to be presenting giving the presentation. Okay, throughout the presentation I'm going to be talking about the PASSCAL Instrument Center, and as you have already heard, I'm calling that the PIC. And we also use a shorthand for the PASSCAL Standing Committee called PASSC, and so don't be confused if I say those two acronyms. So I'll start with an introduction of who I am. As Justin mentioned, I did my dissertation at University of Arizona, working on broadband deployment in Chile and Argentina. It was called the CHARGE experiment. And during that time, I was lucky enough to see almost an entire deployment through demobilization, and I got to work on analyzing that data for my dissertation. I was also the student in charge of data archiving for that experiment, and so I got a lot of experience with portable seismology during that time period. As early career faculty, I deployed a broadband instruments to Argentina again in the eastern Sierras Pampeanas. It was called the ESP experiment. And that was done using combined university and PIC resources. It was our seismometers and recording devices, but we used PIC solar equipment, and they gave us help with our data archiving. And they did that in exchange for our making our data available with the traditional PASSCAL specifications that we released the data after having 2 years to work on it ourselves. I paired with Hirsch Gilbert, who is another early career faculty, in that to share responsibilities for getting the data and analyzing the data, and that was a really great experience because we really figured out the system together and had a buddy to work with on things. Then more recently, I had a flex array experiment in the Bighorns of Wyoming, and that was funded by an EarthScope proposal. There were 5 principal investigators on that one, and it was an integrated active-passive experiment. We had broadband, intermediate, and short-period instruments, geophones, as well as setting off active sources. And so that was a really great experiment. I worked with many experienced PIs, and I learned a lot through that process. I was mainly in charge of the broadband deployment part of that experiment. So here's a picture of me so you can recognize me. From my experience, you can see I can answer questions and give advice related to broadband and passive source deployments mainly. With my little bit of experience in active source, I can say something about that too. And of course, working in foreign countries, I've had a lot of experience with that. So I have 2 perspectives. As a longtime PASSCAL user since 2001, and now for 3 years I've been a member of the PASSCAL Standing Committee. And I just want to emphasize before I start talking about the PIC that we all of PASSC are here to help you. We're your community, we're leading in the community, and we'd love to hear from you. Here I show pictures of all the people who are currently on the PASSCAL Standing Committee, along with their primary area of expertise on instrumentation. And of course, people who work internationally a lot or in polar regions are listed as well. So I'm here to talk to you today, but we are all here for you and available for questions just like Justin is. So with that, let's get started. Let's talk about your PASSCAL Instrumentation Center. You know, the Instrumentation Center is a community-built facility. It came about because seismologists said, hey, we need a facility that will buy and maintain equipment so that we can use it. And that community building really imparted a community feel on the organization that exists to today. So it's a very friendly organization, very open. And their mission is to advance scientific discovery by providing solutions that enable Earth scientists, us, to collect high-quality seismic data with flexible arrays. And so the PIC scientists are really there to support us. They're there to support you guys. And in addition to being a place where they have instrumentation, they're also a clearinghouse for knowledge. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how the PASSCAL Instrumentation Center is set up and what resources they have. But they also have a lot of good knowledge and information for you to tap. So asking them questions is a really great idea. They're really open and ready to work with you. Okay, so when we think of the Instrumentation Center, we think first about the instrumentation itself. So I'm just going to review what the PIC has for you to borrow before I get into other aspects. So they have a number of different kinds of sensors available, from broadband to short period to geophones. They have broadband instruments from 3 different companies, and they have both 1 and 3 component geophones in addition to short period instrumentation. So the sensors are the center of the operation. But then they also have a lot of the associated equipment available. They have data loggers for each sensor type. Pictured here is the digitizer for broadband instruments, the Quantera Q330. In addition to other types of digitizers, they have Texans, which is the tennis ball shaped thing down below, or tennis ball can shaped thing down below, for recording remotely from geophones. And of course, for smaller experiments, they have geodes and other multi-channel type data recorders. They have GPS clocks to attach to your instrumentation to get good timing on your data. And of course, they have power systems, solar panels, and charge controllers to help power your equipment. If you're working in polar regions, they also have specialized polar supporting equipment. Shown in this picture is a quick deploy box developed for polar conditions, and you can look on the website. I give the link there for other descriptions of equipment they have for polar experimentation. And of course, they have all the cables to connect all of these different components of recording system together. If you want more information on the specifications for this equipment, I've listed here a couple of links that will get you to the parts of the PASSCAL website that explain what instrumentation is available. And if you can't find the information, you can always ask the Instrumentation Center, and here I list their general email for questions, and I'll talk more about that later. You know, if there's something that you need and you don't see that the PIC has it, I really strongly encourage you to bring it up, especially you early career folks. An example of why that can be important is that in recent years, the seismological community has started to think, well, we really need an a broadband instrument that we can actually directly bury in the ground instead of building a vault to house it. And so recently, the PIC worked with manufacturers to communicate that need to the manufacturers and worked with them to help influence the design and function of a new direct bury instrument. And the PASSCAL Instrumentation Center, with the help and encouragement from the PASSCAL Standing Committee, acquired the funding to buy several of these, and we're going to be starting to work with them and test them out in the coming years. So that's an example of where, you know, the community or a few people bring up an idea or something we want to do, and the PIC can help us make that happen because they have the ear of the manufacturers. So do speak up if you have an idea. The PIC's important function in all of this is instrument repair. They engage in very careful testing of all this equipment. As equipment comes out of the field from deployment and needs to go back into the field for a new experiment, they engage in very careful testing of the equipment. And so a lot of their expense and time on the instrument side is bound up in trying to make sure that the equipment is field worthy as it comes through the instrumentation center. And that's so that we can be confident investigators. We can feel safe that our time and effort in pulling off a deployment will be returned in high quality data, and that's really an essential function of the instrumentation center. So kind of the other hat that the PIC wears is as a clearinghouse for expertise. They're a center of expertise on these kinds of deployments. And I'm just going to give you a few examples. They have people who know a lot about vault design for broadband deployments, power system consultation, special considerations you have to make for extreme environmental conditions at a site, equipment training for you and your students, all aspects of shipping. They know an enormous amount about that and have a lot of help for you. They know about field testing of equipment, which we call huddle testing, and good field practices. They help you troubleshoot over the phone, or they can send a field engineer to help you work with your equipment in the field. And of course, they're there to help you with assistance and advice for data archiving. And so they have an enormous expertise that's available for us. Okay, so you want to design a new experiment. When and how do you interact with the PIC? For the rest of the presentation, I'm going to talk about step-by-step ways you can or should interact with the PIC if you're doing an experiment that's going to use their equipment. And I'm going to give you some examples from my own experience that are mainly broadband related, but just to give you a few examples of how that can happen. I'll try to highlight throughout what is your responsibility, primary responsibility as a PI, as you're trying to pull together and execute an experiment, and then which parts of that process can the PIC help you with. So I've kind of got it set up as step-by-step with what are you supposed to be doing, and then how can the PIC help. Throughout this presentation, I'm going to emphasize advanced planning. Working with the PIC well ahead of the NSF solicitation or other funding deadlines can save you from a lot of things such as cost overruns, customs problems, and general scrambling about after you get funded. And it's hard to know what to do when you're an early career person. You haven't done an experiment like this or been fully responsible for one. And I'm hoping that this presentation can get you guys past some of the pitfalls that I fell into as I was doing my first experiment. I'm also going to emphasize being a good steward of our equipment. Really good planning will protect our equipment resource for future experiments, and so you'll see that theme emphasized throughout the talk as well. I want to emphasize that most of the information I'm going to give is also on the PASSCAL website, so check it out. And it's pretty much a similar information, just broken down in a different way. And I'll give you links to relevant parts of this site as we go through so you can obtain additional information without having to poke around too much. Okay, so the first step in your process is going to be designing your experiment. You want to do an experiment, you have to think about what is it going to be. And of course, the first thing you're going to be thinking about is the scientific design for your target question or hypothesis. And I'm not going to talk about experiment design in this talk, but one of the things that you're going to be thinking about is what sensors are you going to use and what digitizers will you need to go along with those, and how many are you going to need. And so, of course, that plays into what you're going to think about next. As you're designing and dreaming about what you want to do, you want to make a bunch of considerations, and I'm going to show you a lot because, again, planning well is going to help your experiment go much more smoothly. First of all, you need to find out if you need to obtain a support commitment letter from PASSCAL, and this is a rather new addition to the process. Not all experiments and programs require a support commitment letter. You can check the NSF solicitation or with your program officer to figure out if you need a support letter. They recommend that you work 2 weeks ahead of time at least to get your letter pulled together before your submission date. I would encourage working even earlier than that. Communicating with the PIC staff about getting a support letter also helps you communicate with them about how many sensors you think you're going to need. Even let them know that you're considering getting a PIC supported experiment. And they can help you figure out what's a reasonable number of instruments for the pools to support at any given time. And so it's always good to contact them whether you need a support commitment letter or not. If you want more information about the support letter, I've listed the link here and you can read up on that on the IRIS website. A good consideration to make right off the bat is, as you're thinking about the number of seismometers that you're going to need, is that replacement equipment isn't possible mostly for sensors and digitizers. The equipment at the PIC is heavily subscribed. Most equipment is in the field most of the time. And so a small percent of your equipment will fail just because Mother Nature has her way with your equipment and you just can't, avoid it all of the time. And so be prepared that you may not have functioning equipment for the entire number of sensors that you request from the PIC. And always having a flexible plan as you're designing is a good thing to consider. Can you make your design flexible to enable you to delete or move sensors without endangering your scientific goals? So that's always something good to consider at the beginning. You'll be thinking about a budget. So keeping money in mind, there's a bunch of things to think about. Of course, the PIC has all of the digitizers and sensors and cabling that you need. But you'll need other things to build your site, especially if you're going for a passive source study. If you're working with broadband or intermediate period sites, you'll need vaults to protect the equipment from the elements, so you need to budget for that. Regardless of what experiment you're doing, whether it's passive source, active source, single channel, or multi-channel, you'll need to be thinking about what batteries you need and how many and what type. Of course, putting all this equipment out in the field means it's subject to the investigation of numerous critters. And so fencing and other protective construction should be a part of your budget. We want to protect the equipment from animals for future use. And you also need a lot of associated equipment in addition to all these things, such as compasses, GPS, maps, tools, voltmeters, office supplies, et cetera, et cetera. And so you need to consider what additional things do you need to actually make your deployment happen. And those are all things you need to budget for. Additional stuff to think about when you're thinking about your budget, are there special weather conditions that might require special solar design, vault design, or a careful choice of site or service schedule? Those things can all impact your budget. Will telemetry be important for your study? The Instrumentation Center has a certain number of units to telemeter data on state of health, if your instrumentation is running or not, and you can consider if that's going to be useful for you to have throughout your project. Think about what computing resources you'll need. Will you need laptops for the field? Will you need data storage devices? Will you need laptops for computers or software for analyzing data? And one of the most important pieces in thinking about your budget is to fund planning and implementation activities, in particular training at the PIC for you and your students, which is essential, and I'll talk about a bit later, and travel support to maybe get one of the PIC staff, a field engineer, out into the field with you as you first start to deploy your instruments. And that can be really extremely helpful at the beginning of your project, but of course the PIC actually doesn't support the travel for a field engineer. You need to write that into your budget, and there's a link to the PIC policy on field engineers there at the bottom of this page. Still thinking about money, you'll need to be thinking about shipping and customs, and that's something you want to start as soon as possible. I want to emphasize that Jackie Gonzalez at the PIC is the shipping expert and coordinator, and one of your first things you should do is contact Jackie as soon as you're even thinking about writing a proposal. Start talking to her. She can help you with things like contacting companies to ask for shipping quotes, providing weight and dimension estimates to get those quotes, For international, finding out customs policies for the country that you're working in. And through this process of working with Jackie, you'll need to become familiar with what's required if you're working internationally. There's different documentation types. You might need to translate some documents. You might need to pay for some storage fees or broker fees. And of course, there's different bonds, taxes, and duties in the different countries. This is all really important because all these things can play into your budget. And as a part of using the PIC instrumentation, it's your responsibility to make sure that the equipment is safely shipped. And if the fees are involved in helping with the safety of the equipment, then you need to appropriately fund for those. In my experience, customs can make or break an international experiment, and working with Jackie through the PIC can help us maintain a really good relationship with folks at embassies and customs that are essential for you to get your equipment into the country, but also for future experiments. Other investigators who want to go to the country and work, we want to make sure that we maintain those good relationships by working ahead and working consistently. So with all of the logistics for international experiments, I'm going to dwell on this a moment longer. It's become increasingly complicated actually in recent years to get equipment into a foreign country. And one of the things that can really help along the process along is to seek a collaborator in the country that you're working in. They can make a huge difference in the success of your experiment in many ways. Customs is one, but also in finding good site locations, local culture, consulting on, how do you interact with people when you're out in the field. They can assist with site security. And don't forget the possibility of increasing the impact of your science through collaboration. This is something that happened in my experiments that was awesome. It was really a win-win for me and the collaborator I was working with in the country. Questions you might consider about working with your collaborator: can they and their students analyze or publish some component of the data? Can they be co-authors in some of your papers? Are there opportunities for co-led field trips or integrating students from the two countries on your install, service, or demobilization trips? And NSF really likes to see this in proposals, and it's really great for your students and also the students of your collaborators in the country you're going to. I worked with Patricia Alvarado when I was in Argentina. She's shown in the big vault down in that bottom picture. And I worked with her students in the field. They came with me and helped out, and they learned a lot. And then we also, as a part of my ESP project, we did a joint U.S.-Argentinian student field trip with 4 professors leading a field trip studying field sites and seismology across Argentina, which was a great bonus in terms of education. And so those are the sorts of things that can be possible with a collaborator, in addition to making your deployment more smooth. Always keep in mind to check out the PIC website and documentation as you're doing your design. 2 key parts of the website that are nice to read as you're writing your proposal is the information with the link there on a description of the scope of PIC support that's available to you. Kind of reiterates a lot of what I'm saying here, but it's always good to read another version. And they have a nice section on documents related to borrowing equipment and what do you do and how do you do it and that sort of thing. And so check out those websites as well. One more thing about what you should be thinking about in terms of experiment design, kind of to go along with the shipping idea to start as soon as possible, is to be aware of permitting requirements. So not only shipping, but actually putting your instruments in the ground. Most kinds of land in the United States require a permit, some sort of permit to put your instrumentation in the ground. And the process can take quite a long time, and it can be especially long if you're working on government land, so starting early is a really good idea. And the reason is that digging holes can open a whole range of discussions about whether you can dig in certain places or not. And one of the key things to pay attention to is to make sure that you can explain your goals in terms lay people can understand. Each land use agency or field office has their own policies, and so especially for digging holes for either passive or active source equipment, they often need to do things like the Forest Service needs archaeological and biological surveys to make sure that you're not digging up any resources, biological or archaeological in nature. And so they need to have permitting done. Each different kind of institution and each local managing office has different, they work with permitting in different ways. So you want to contact your local office as soon as you can and work with them to develop a plan for permitting and get an understanding from them about what the timing is to get a permit and what fees are associated. So that's why you need to think about it in your planning stage so you can make sure you have adequate time and money to be able to handle the permitting. For private land, you still need to get a permit. Most states require that you call before you dig an 811 or a similar number. And no matter where you dig, there's buried utilities, and so you have to make sure you meet this step. One example is in Wyoming. I was going to put a seismometer in this woman's field, just kind of seemed out in the middle of nowhere to me. And when I called 811 to get the permit, they said, oh, the fiber optic cable between Wyoming and Montana is buried somewhere out there, and so we definitely need somebody to go out and survey and figure out what it was or where it is. And it turned out it was about 200 meters from my proposed site, so I was able to put it in. But if I'd dug in the wrong place, I might have chopped the internet connection between Wyoming and Montana. So you really don't want to do that. So it's always useful then, with that example in mind, to be really flexible with your plans where you can be. If you are working with a land manager or agency, if you have a flexible alternate plan for a site location, it can be really helpful. Again, an example, working up in Wyoming for me, I was working with the Forest Service trying to put sites in land that was close to archaeological sites and had biological concerns. And they said, well, how flexible are you with your site locations? And I said, well, somewhere around in this 15 kilometer radius would be fine. And they said, okay, well, why don't you propose 3 sites that are in that area, and then we can tell you whether we've actually already done archaeo and biological surveys in those areas, and then we won't actually even have to send anybody out if you can choose one of those sites. So you'll see on the right a little topographic map of 2 sites that I suggested, number 1 and 2, the circles, for putting a seismometer in one location. And they came back at me and said, well, hey, the hatchered areas on this map are areas where we've already done surveys, and so you could just go ahead and put the site in. We could just approve a permit right away without sending anybody out. And that really helped cut down on the time it took to get the permit, and it cut down on the expense as well. And you can see in site 1 that I suggested there was a hatchered area, and that's where we ended up putting the site in the end. So having a flexible plan can really help you work with those land managers to do a quick and easy job of getting your permit in place. All right, that's a ton for you to do. How can the PIC help you with all this? So as you're thinking about sensor specifications, what equipment you might need, PIC staff are available to answer your questions that you might have about sensors or equipment. Anything you want to know, what kind of instrumentation might be appropriate or alternatives, they are there for you. The PIC can also help you consult on vault and other materials. They can tell you about different options and where to buy those materials, what their cost might be. And they give really excellent advice on power systems. They'll help you figure out how much solar you need, if you're doing a passive source experiment, what kind of stand options are available, how much battery capacity do you need. You can talk with them and they'll give great advice on all of those things. If you have special needs, you can ask for advice. As an example, if you think telemetry might be good for your experiment, they have great advice. They have testing equipment to see if telemetry will work in your area. They can talk with you about battery considerations that will support telemetry in addition to your data recording. And so they have lots of good things to advise you on in terms of your any special needs you might have. And as I've mentioned before, the PIC staff know enormous amounts about shipping equipment and shipping internationally. As I've already mentioned, you should definitely contact Jackie, but they can help with anything I've already mentioned, plus import and export licensing. They have a really good section of their website that deals with shipping, so check that out if you're curious, and of course, get Jackie in the loop as soon as you can to avoid any holdups in your experiment. In addition to all of these resources, the PIC has equipment actually to support computing. They have field computers you can borrow for the duration of your deployment and demobilization, and they have large capacity disks to help you store information on site and at your university. You can borrow those things during the whole field phase of your deployment. They also provide many types of software, and in particular, field-ready log and data viewing software for reviewing state of health of your instruments, programming Texans, and also little computational tools for figuring out how much power you'll need for each site or for the total experiment, and how much memory you'll need for your data. And all of those tools are available through PIC and on their website. Okay, so you've designed your experiment, you submitted your proposal, and yahoo, you're funded. So what now? The first thing you'll need to do, and I mean right away, maybe like the next day, maybe even the same day, is to get yourself on the PASSCAL schedule. And to do that, there's an instrument request form that you submit, and I'll show you the link there, and there's actually a manual that goes along with that can guide you through the process. And you submit a request to the PIC that you want these instruments, and they will get you on the schedule. Now, there's a lot of kind of fuzziness surrounding how long it takes to get your instruments. There's a prioritization based on your funding institution, but the wait times vary based on a lot of other things, and it's often oversimplified in the talk of the seismological community. And so I just want to kind of give you a couple examples here. It depends on the kinds of instruments you're asking for. For broadband, passive source equipment, it can be strongly size dependent in cases. For example, 10 stations can usually go as scheduled in an NSF proposal with a little bit of effort on the part of the PIC to help you get that in place. And then deployments that are closer to like 60 stations, which is a large deployment, is harder to schedule and highly dependent on what's been recently funded, and you just need to check with the PIC on that. Example is that recently they got instruments for a 60-station deployment within 8 months of the funding date, but in the past it's been closer to 2 years or so, and so it really just depends on your timing, and so you have to ask about that. Active source, geophones and Texans can usually go as scheduled in your NSF or other proposal, and the geodes, the multi-channel recorders, there's usually no wait for those, so those are very easy to do. But you know, the wait time is not necessarily a bad thing, because the second step in your project is going to be planning, and that actually sometimes takes a while. An example is in Wyoming, our Flux Array experiment, the instruments were available a surprising 4 months after our project was funded, and you know, we found out early February we were funded and we needed to get our instruments out in July, and it was really actually quite a daunting task and almost impossible to get all of the planning done in that time frame. And so actually having 8 months to a year is sometimes useful, and there's a lot you can do in that time as you're waiting, and I'm going to give you some suggestions here. So you need to get a good base of operations. This provides an address for the PIC to ship your instrumentation to. It provides a place to huddle test or test your equipment after it's shipped, and a place to store equipment. And potential places to look for, I show pictures here of a bunch of different styles of base operation sites. But places that I've used, you know, you can use university or government facilities. Good places are field operation sites for either institution, field campsites, university buildings, Even vacation or short-term rentals work really well. You can supplement with rental storage units for some of your equipment. And I actually have used any and all of these kinds of base of operations sites. It should be secure with a good contact person there in case there's a problem while you're not there. It should have appropriate space to organize, program, and test your equipment after shipping. It should be easily accessible after hours or in inclement weather, so make sure it's accessible. It should have a reliable source of power because you'll need that for testing, and preferably with a phone or internet availability, so if there's a problem, it's easier for you to get online and on the phone with the PIC to troubleshoot questions. If it's a passive experiment, you probably need to have an outdoor space so you can test your GPS clocks and your solar panels. Then if you're going international, you need to start coordinating with your shipper and customs officer as soon as possible, and you do that through the PIC. One of the things to note is that some of these things can take time and there can be delays. So what you can do to help the PIC and your experiment is to plan alternate schedules in case there are delays. So, you know, if something gets delayed, you're not kind of caught in the lurch without a plan B for deployment. And so think about that ahead of time as you're doing your planning. Of course, one of the biggest things is that choosing your actual site locations for, you know, either active source or passive source, and that takes some time. So actually, while you're waiting for your instruments, that's one of the big things you can do. There are a bunch of considerations to make, and I'm going to talk about a few of those. First of all, you have to consider your science goals, of course, but then there are other things you need to consider. One of the things is access. You can see in the lower right there, my collaborator Hirsch Gilbert is standing on a road that we needed to use to access a site that had a stream crossing, and of course it was inaccessible during parts of the year. And so access is not just can you drive in with your equipment, but you know, can you get in there at all the times of the year that you need to. You need to have a good sky view if you're doing a passive source experiment for your solar and GPS. In the bottom left, you can see two of my students, one from the US and Argentina, at a site in Argentina where we found this beautiful location in the middle of this field with good sky view and good aspect. And it was because it had been cropped, all the vegetation had been cropped by the goats that the farmer had. And once we put up our fence to keep the goats out, all the vegetation grew and made it difficult for our solar panel to work. So talking to the landowner or people who are familiar with the site can be really useful in choosing appropriate sites, so that should be a part of the process. Other things to consider, one of the biggest things to consider is flooding and whether it's possible at your site. And by this I mean, you know, not just if you have coastal sites and you're concerned about tides, or if you're in a river valley and you're concerned about the river flooding, but also just good drainage in general. It's amazing where water can stand on the surface. And water is a really bad thing for this equipment, as you can probably surmise. And part of protecting our equipment is making good site location choices, including making sure that the sites aren't going to flood. And then you also need to think about security, and I've mentioned animals already quite a few times, so you need to think about what's going to protect your sites from cows or goats or bears, but also humans, and make sure that you are putting the equipment in a place that is unobtrusive, so out of the way, so people don't generally know it's there. And also, it's always best to have someone around who is looking out for your equipment. In Argentina, as you can see in the lower right, we'd often place our seismometers very close to a ranch house where we had talked to the owner and they were willing to keep an eye on those stations. And we had no problems with theft if we engaged in that practice, that equipment can go missing if you don't. And of course, with all these factors and choosing your sites, it's quite a job trying to find good sites that work. So when you get a good one, you'll get really excited and jump up and down like me here in Wyoming. This is a fantastic site. Okay, so other things you can be doing, you're choosing your sites. You can also start to acquire the site building equipment that you'll need to build out your sites, and actually start the building process. Dig holes, get your vaults in the ground, or start to place flags where you're going to put your equipment if you're working on an active source deployment. And so there's a bunch of advanced things you can do to get sites prepared so that when you get your equipment, you just stick it in the ground and maximize your data recording time for the time that you have the equipment. And of course, the PIC can help with all of this. One of the really essential components of the planning phase is to go to the PIC and get some training with both for you and your students. It's very comprehensive and includes equipment, advice, install information, service information, demobilization procedures, software training, data archiving training. It's all included, and it typically only takes 2 days, so it's actually pretty cheap and cost-effective for your budget. It'll make your field operations go smoother and faster. It'll help you understand reasons for good site choice and give you the opportunity to ask all sorts of questions. But one of the really important things is that it's essential to understand proper equipment handling. And that kind of good handling of the equipment in the field and with shipping will really help ensure that the equipment is usable for future seismologists. So it's very essential, and it's required. The PIC has best practices documents that are currently under construction, but they're not all finished. And so really the only place that you can get really good information on best practices is to go to the PIC for training. And so that should definitely be a part of your planning process. And do it early in the process because it can really help you in your site choice and building steps as well. All right, so you've got your instruments, right? You have them shipped to you and you're ready to go. Let's talk about implementation through demobilization. As you're unpacking your equipment, pay attention to how it was packed because that can help you understand good packing practices because you'll need to pack up your equipment and send it back to the PIC when you're finished. Keep an inventory of what you received. Check the packing list, unpacking list against what they thought they sent to you from the PIC, and then also keep that so that when you return the equipment, you can check what you got against what you're sending back to the PIC. And of course, you need to test your equipment, and I show a number of different testing procedures here in the bottom, both for active source and for broadband. But you definitely need to test your equipment in a good place before you send it to the field, and having that good base of operations will really help with that. Active source also requires programming of equipment, so you're not just testing, but you're actually programming your instruments to record remotely. As you are putting out your instrumentation and maintaining it, you need to carefully document metadata, which means site locations, dates of install, equipment types, serial numbers, any equipment you swap between sites. The data people at the PIC like to emphasize, and it's really important, that your seismic waveform data is not useful at all unless you have good metadata. So as you're attending your training at the PIC, they'll talk to you about all the things you need to record, and then you just need to make sure that you're doing it when you're in the field. At any time throughout the process of deploying or maintaining the sites, notify the PIC in the moment about problem instrumentation because they really need to know about that in case it's going to impact whether that instrument actually goes to the field in the deployment that comes after you. So whatever's in the schedule. And so that it helps them kind of with their planning for future deployments. If you have a problem with instrumentation, as you're out at the site, make sure you note the serial numbers and the site conditions, and that might help the PIC understand what happened or help you troubleshoot to actually get the equipment back up and running. Just understand that replacing equipment during a deployment is not easy, and especially digitizers and sensors for broadband equipment is not generally replaceable. And however, power boxes and cables are much easier to acquire than extra digitizers and sensors. So be understanding that the PIC won't be able to usually entertain a request to get replacement equipment. As you are checking your instruments, you'll want to also check the data. in the field for problems, and of course the PIC provides software for you to do that. Here's an example of QPeak Q330 digitizer field software, and they can help you if you see any problems in your data. It'll help you figure out something that might be going wrong that's not apparent when you visit the site, but is apparent in the data, and you might be able to fix a problem before you collect a lot of data that's not useful. Finally, you want to make sure that you clean and carefully pack instrumentation when returning it to the PIC. Good citizenship in your seismological community will ensure longevity of the equipment and its availability for the next scheduled experiment. You want to make sure you return it in the condition it was received, so you really want to clean it well. This is particularly important for international experiments because customs requirements are pretty stringent, and if your equipment is coming through customs dirty, it could really hold up a shipment in its entirety and make it unavailable for the next person in the PASSCAL schedule. So it's really important that you do that both for the equipment and also for the sanity of your fellow seismologists who are using the equipment after you. Of course, the PIC can help with all of that, right? I mentioned that you can get a field engineer to come to the field with you, and if you've budgeted for one, they can help with your huddle test, and also consult on the building of passive sites and installing geophones. On the bottom right, you can see a picture from my Wyoming field experiment where Steve Azevedo in the blue t-shirt is working with all of our site install crews to work on installing our first site together so everybody can see how to build a site correctly and consult with us in our design for our experiment. And they can also help you troubleshoot problematic equipment in this process. They can do this on the phone or with your field engineer in the field is easier. But you want to make sure and plan time for that because equipment does go astray and you'll need to spend time troubleshooting it if you want all your data. So as you are scheduling your install and your service runs to check on your equipment, you want to make sure that you schedule time for troubleshooting equipment that's not working right. And then when you return your equipment, they'll check lists of equipment they sent to you against what you returned to help you locate misplaced PIC equipment. And it's surprising with an experiment with a lot of universities how equipment gets scattered around between people's cars and different universities, and it's really helpful to have them to check in with to make sure you got everything back to them. And then the final step of the process is also a very important one, and that is data archiving. It's really important to practice timely data archiving. Working with it in batches as you're servicing from the field makes it easier to handle. Data should be delivered to the DMC as soon as you can, and definitely before the general release date of your data. So you can request a 2-year proprietary period after the end of your deployment to work on the data yourself without the public access being provided. And the DMC will ensure that only access to waveforms will be for the PI and others designated to have access for the proprietary period. But the policy is the delivery of the data to the DMC is the PI's responsibility, and so make sure that you're taking care of that. A good way to do that is to ask a student to be responsible for data archiving. I did that as a graduate student, and it's a really great way to learn about seismometers and waveforms. The PIC is also going to help you get the data sent to the DMC, so after you collect all of your information from the field in the blue box there, you'll send it to PASSCAL, and they'll verify the data and work with you to fix any problems in the data, and then they'll send it on to the DMC. The DMC will archive the data and then ask PASSCAL to verify that it's complete, and then PASSCAL will work with you to verify its completeness. There's a lot of information on the PIC website about archiving and data formats, so do check out their website for information on that. And I'd like to emphasize that in this process that can be somewhat complicated sometimes, if you need any help, the PIC staff is enormously helpful in getting you through your data archiving. If you don't have data that will unpack properly, if GPS timing is a problem, they're really available and very helpful and very friendly when you're frustrated with your data, and so definitely use that resource. So to wrap up, I'm just going to pop up this list of key people at the PIC. If you are looking for someone to contact about a particular problem or question, these are your go-to key people. And I want to emphasize that if you're not sure who to contact, use that general PASSCAL email that I gave before. It's not an email that goes into some random mailbox and is sitting there for months without being checked. It's checked daily and multiple times a day. And in fact, the PIC staff recommend that if you're even emailing a specific person, such as Steve Azevedo about software question, CC the general email so that if he's in the field or otherwise unavailable, someone at the PIC will get back to you as soon as possible. So definitely use that general email. All right, so that's the end of my presentation. PASSCAL is your facility, and it's clear through this presentation seismology needs a community. And the PIC and PASC would love to hear from you. If you can't find what you need, bring it up. It's your facility, and it's really a community enterprise. And so we'd love to hear from all our early career people about questions you have or anything else. If you're curious about serving on the PASSCAL Standing Committee, I found it to be really interesting and educational and fun to be involved in the community in this way. If you have an interest, please do contact Laura Wagner, who is the chair of the PASSCAL Standing Committee, and let her know of your interest. And the next time we have open spaces on the Standing Committee, maybe we can tap you for some service and involvement. So with that, I'd like to thank you, and I think Andy's going to take some questions now, yeah?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Megan. That was great. I think Justin, if you are out there, I think Justin was willing to sort of proctor the Q&A session. Justin,
Yes,
is that right?
that's correct. Yeah, we've got several questions here that have come in. So there have been a few questions from Shunji Wei about international deployments, and I know that was something Megan covered in quite a bit of detail in her talk. So if there are additional questions around that that haven't been touched on yet, please feel free to pipe up and add questions, or if you have questions about anything related to PASSCAL, just go ahead and put it in the questions box, and I will make sure to put to ask those of Megan. One thing in particular.
Even better, send them to Jackie.
Or send them to Jackie, right? Yeah. Well, we also have like a dozen PIC staff or so are currently participating in this webinar, and so I know some of them have some expertise and they've offered to jump in and answer questions where appropriate. One that I wanted to pose was sent in by Shenji, and mentioned that they're working with a university out of the U.S. to borrow equipment from PASSCAL, but they're wondering if PASSCAL also provides consultant service for foreign organizations that would like to build their own technique group for transportable seismic stations. So I guess just to summarize, just wondering about foreign consultation and if that's something that PASSCAL provides to foreign organizations. And I'm not sure, Megan, is that something that you would be able to answer?
I mean, the conversations that we've had on the PASSCAL Standing Committee are, thinking about what resources does the PIC have for that kind of activities. And the answer is they don't really have any funding for that. And so, thinking about a really extensive project where the PIC staff is helping a foreign country come up with their own version of what we're doing, I mean, that would have to be a conversation, I think, with IRIS itself, maybe involving trying to obtain some funding through a proposal type process, because the PIC staff are very busy, and just asking for that additional help on top of what they're already doing would take some significant planning, I think. I'm sure others out there, if some of the PIC staff are listening, could have something to say about that too. But that would be something that to bring up with Kent Anderson, or even with the PASSCAL Standing Committee. That would definitely be a good question to bring up, because if it's something that we'd like to see happen in the community, then we could start talking about pulling together some people to make it happen.
Great. There were a few other questions from Corey Neighbors writes in and wanted to know that she said, I understand that one needs to budget for shipping and training travel to and from the PIC. Is there any cost associated with borrowing equipment? So for instance, specific example of borrowing a field computer or other non-essential equipment, is there a cost associated with that?
No, there is not. And that's because when you get funding from the National Science Foundation, especially, and you are proposing to use equipment from the PIC, what they have is available to you to the extent of their ability to provide it. And that, of course, plays into who's on the schedule already, so you might have to wait for some resources. But they don't charge you anything for that use, and that's just awesome. It's a really amazing resource in that way. And that's what we built the instrumentation center to do, is to provide that at no cost and to be not have to be a part of your proposal.
All right, another question here. If you're planning a very short-term pre-proposal experiment, which has not yet been funded by NSF or someone else, can you still get equipment, assuming that you can cover shipping and training, travel, or other funds? And the questioner noted that they're specifically thinking of lower use, short period, or geophone equipment and the thumper.
Yeah, I would, my perspective on that from talking with Bruce is that's, extremely possible. And, the NSF likes to see the PIC supporting early career investigators who are trying to get a real, big proposal up and running, or university people who are looking at doing a smaller scale experiment with a class or with undergraduate research students. And if you have your own funding to support that, you should just talk to the PIC about it and start getting it underway. As I mentioned, smaller scale deployments are much easier to schedule, and it's easier to find equipment for that. And as the person who asked the question mentioned, some of the equipment is less used than others, and so I think they would like to see that equipment in the field and being used. Definitely just shoot an email to Bruce and say, hey, I want to do this. How do I get started? And that'd be a great question for him.
Great. Looks like one earlier question we had from James Nee here. He wanted to know about where he could find information on a leak and waterproof vault design that is suited to working in tropical countries with monsoon seasons that may last up to 3 months.
Wow. That's a great, very specific question. And, I've had similar questions in the past. I was working in a part of Argentina. I was concerned about pretty heavy seasonal rains, and just email the PIC email and say, hey, I'm trying to plan this, and I'm curious about vault design, making it waterproof. There's been a lot of PIs in the community who have worked over the years in tropical locations, and if the PIC doesn't know, they know the PIs who have done that kind of work and can refer you to them. And so, they're kind of nice, a nice connector to bring the community together and refer PIs to each other if they don't have that information. And when I was looking into it, that's what they did, is I contacted them and asked about it, and they said, oh, you should talk to so-and-so who was working in Costa Rica and had to do that, and I did that, and that was really helpful.
Great. We've got a question here from Derek Shutt. He is saying, how many people in the experiment do you recommend sending for training? So for instance, is it sufficient if just one person comes for the formal training and then they can come back and train the rest of the crew, or do they recommend you send everybody, or what is there a guideline there?
There's not a stringent guideline. I think the PIC would like to see, of course, the PI should be there because you're the one who's responsible for the equipment, and so you should definitely be there. But then in terms of students, I think as many as you can get funding for to come. It's a really great experience. You learn a lot. But then, of course, graduate students come in the middle of the project, and sometimes you can't always plan for that. I think it's also a really good part of the training. Let's say you've got 5 students and 3 of them can come to the PIC. If you get a field engineer, like if you budget for a field engineer to come at the start of your experiment, that's a really great way to take the training that's been the core training for your students and help to spread it out amongst all the people who are participating. And I think you as a PI need to make judicious choices about which students are going to be in charge. For instance, if you have 6 students and you can get 3 of them to go for training at the PIC, you might put them into pairs for deployment, one who's had the PIC training and one who maybe has not, so that at least one person who's out there with the equipment has had the training at the facility. And like I said, it's cheap and short, and it's really fun to go there and see the place and meet all the people. So I think as many as you can do would be a good idea, but no hard and fast rules.
I've been trading messages with folks at the PIC, and they echo your sentiments, Megan. They said send
Okay, good.
as many folks as you can. Let's see if we have a question here. One just came in, and it says, for foreign experiment, can a Pascal engineer go there a week early and train a lot of people in country? That might help cut the cost down. I'm not sure if that's something that we've done in the past. It looks like Panina is piping up on the chat window here and saying
Yeah.
yes. I'm not sure, Megan, if that is that something you guys have had experience with in your international experiment?
Yeah, yeah, because my Eastern Sierras Pompeianos deployment wasn't a fully supported PIC experiment, we didn't do it for that project, but I know for the charge experiment, they had an engineer come down and work with everybody down there for maybe even a week or two. Of course, you have to pay for their travel and everything, and make sure you're communicating with the PIC about what you need as early as possible. But you know that's definitely possible and could be a useful way to work with it, especially for international projects, right?
Great. So it doesn't look like I don't see any other new questions. If anyone out there has any additional ones, feel free to send those to Megan, myself, or the Pascal list at pascal@pascal.nmt.edu.
Or to any of the Pascal Standing Committee members as well.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, thank you, Megan. Of course, and I want to thank Megan for putting up the slide with listing all the members of the Pascal Standing Committee. They're all very much enthusiastic about the Pascal facility and want to get feedback from community members and help out and provide assistance to you guys as where they can. So please feel free to reach out to any of them. I think that with that, we will wrap up today's webinar. I want to thank everybody for attending, and I'd like to again thank Megan for putting on a wonderful presentation and sharing her experience and expertise with us. And thanks again to everyone for being here.
Thanks, Justin.